Welcome everyone to the last Space Syntax Lab seminar in this term. I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Linh Phamvu, who will be presenting her ongoing PhD work on the spatial culture of Ham in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Linh has been a PhD candidate at the Butler School of Architecture since 2022. Her interest in collective memory and spatial arrangements began during her undergrad studies in interior design and has evolved through more than 7 years of professional experience, specializing in hospitality projects across diverse cultural contexts, from developed to underdeveloped countries, spanning Europe to Southeast Asia. Linh's work as an interior designer has deepened her exploration of interiority as an urban quality, and her professional background has profoundly influenced her research, challenging traditional boundaries and conceptions of interiors through a spatial socio approach. This perspective is at the heart of her current work, which investigates Ham, the distinctive Vietnamese alleyways that house a significant proportion of the population in Ho Chi Minh City. Linh's study uses configurational analyses and ethnographic fieldwork to explore how these spaces contribute to local cultural continuity and a unique post-colonial identity. Before we start, if you have any questions during the talk, please put them in the chat so we can address them during our Q&A. And with this, please join me in welcome Linh. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Kimon, for offering me this great opportunity to share some of my initial but fascinating findings about one of the most overlooked elements in the spatial structure, alleyways. So today's presentation is a work in progress of my PhD research, which focuses on the spatial culture of Vietnamese alleyways, also known as Ham, in Ho Chi Minh City. And my PhD research is supervised by Dr. Sam Griffiths and Professor Sophia Sarah from Space Syntax Lab, UCL. I guess a very first question that many people might ask is, why alleyways? I believe the reason behind this question is largely arises from a preconception of alleyways as a secondary or even an informal element in the urban landscape. The term alley itself in English also carries some negative connotations. However, alleyways are regarded differently in Asian urban contexts. Since the early 21st century, many studies have highlighted the importance of Asian alleyways as relics of their urban past for two main reasons. The first reason is that alleyways in many Asian countries such as China, Japan, Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam are found to be deeply rooted in the traditional settlement of their spatial structure. Secondly, despite their historical significance, alleyways are increasingly facing a risk of vanishing amidst the urban restructuring process that's taking place in many Asian cities. Despite sharing some historical and typological similarities with other Asian alleyways, Vietnamese alleyways, however, tell a different story. And the most significance about Vietnamese alleyways is that they are found to be significantly growth during the economic renovation in 1986. And today, they house for more than 80% of the population in the two major cities in Vietnam, which are Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. That is to say, Vietnamese alleyways are more than just an informal element or even urban relic, but they may potentially a significant urban phenomenon in Vietnamese urban landscape. Even so, the formation of alleyways in these two major cities has some fundamental differences. which can be, for example, the term alleys in Ho Chi Minh City, the southern city, are often referred as hẻm, while in the north they are referred as ngõ, and the distinction in this is originated in the Vietnamese modern history, which can be observed in these two fingers. The left finger here is illustrated the southern territorial expansion of Vietnam since the 11th century. As you can see from here, Ho Chi Minh City was initially emerged as a result of this territorial expansion, starting from the north to the south, while Hanoi, located here up to the north, had been established from the earliest day of Vietnam. And because of that, then when you look at the graph here, you can see that Ho Chi Minh City has a much shorter feudal period while undergoing a more extended period of colonization compared to Hanoi. And there are two critical years that I would like to highlight here, which are 1954 and 1975. Firstly, 1975 was the year Vietnam was reunited. And before 1975, Ho Chi Minh City was in fact comprises of Saigon, the colonial core, with a well-defined urban grid structure, and Gia Định, the migration zone, which was largely neglected with the minimal road infrastructure. Unlike Hanoi, a thousand-year capital with 80% of its urban heritage originated in the traditional village structure, the history of Ho Chi Minh City is a story of migration and expansion, and therefore the urban development of Ho Chi Minh City was fundamentally shaped by great disruption and diversity caused by both internal and external factors. Significantly, 1954 marked the beginning of the greatest and largest internal migration wave in the city, and the history context behind this movement was the Geneva Accords between the colonial French and the communist Vietnamese, which divided the country into two provisional states. This historical event had led to a great transmigration of nearly 1 million Catholics from northern Vietnam to southern Vietnam, and many of them settled in Gia Định, this green area here, and a small part of them settled in this green area. There's another smaller group of migrants mostly from Quảng Nam province, the central of Vietnam, also relocated to Gia Định, and they settled out right in the junction here, which later called Bảy Hiền Junction. However, the most significant between these two migration waves is that the Catholic migration was systematically organized at a large scale and often involving a whole villages reside together, while for the central migration, they often relocated as individuals without any organized assistance. And as you can see from the map in 1988 here, it depicts the stark contrast in the spatial grid of Saigon and Gia Định. And especially during the colonial core, Gia Định was largely neglected with minimal road infrastructure. And even after the 1975, after the national reunification, the settlement established by these migrants still remain absent from many official maps. And the photo here was taken at Bay Hin Junction in 1967, and you can compare to the photo of Saigon Street before 1975 to see how much the difference of this urban landscape in these two areas. And because of this, it raises a question of how were the migration settlements was established in the absence of a pre-existing urban grid in this area. So when I interviewed the local resident who was the first generation of migrants in the Zaden area, they all described this area as nothing but empty fields and muddy pathway. And from what being said, the initial settlement emerged organically through the subdivision of land blocks owned by private owners with little to no top-down control. And during this time, heme was the earliest form of road to emerge from this individually formed process. According to the configurational theory developed by Bill Hillier, spatial configuration influences urban movement. However, in the case of an area without a pre-existing urban grid, what could be the characteristic of urban movement that emerge here? In order to answer this question, firstly, I have searched for some historical photographs in the city, which are these three photos, and realized that the urban movement in the city, particularly, and in Vietnam in general, has remained more or less the same. As you can see from the photos here, which was taken during my field trip in Vietnam. And to be honest, as a local who has been grown up and lived in the city for over 30 years, this urban movement for me is somewhat obvious and unquestionable. However, in the context of globalized urban system, this type of urban movement is often criticized as chaotic and reckless. And the dominance of motor scooter is often cited as one of the major reasons behind this messiness. It is true that motor scooters are the major mode of transportation throughout Vietnam. However, I believe that they are not the cause, but rather the result of this urban movement, which influenced by an individually formed urban grid. In a study about the productive friction in 2024, productive friction is a concept of social interaction from the encounters between individuals in motion and the built environment they navigate. It is proposed that riding a motor scooter allow the riders to optimize their environmental exposure without compromising social interaction. In another study of Thai and his colleagues in 2021, they proposed that motor scooter movement is a combined movement pattern of both pedestrian and car drivers due to its slow to moderate speed, considerate traveling distance, and flexible movement. These initial findings led to three main research questions that I would like to address. The first question is that, is there a distinctive spatial morphological logic to the extensive number of heme that characterize the post-colonial urban transformation of the city? Secondly, to what extent does the spatial arrangement of heme explain the existence of the regularities that define everyday life for the local population? And last but not least, where such regularities exist, to what extent do they articulate a distinctive role for spatial culture in sustaining and negotiating post-colonial identities in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And my study employed configurational analysis combined with historical analysis and ethnographic fieldwork. In historical analysis, beside the main method of accurate research, oral history also play a significant role in filling the gap of missing recorded data from official sources. And the second method is configurational analysis, which is based on space syntax theory and analytical method. Space syntax was developed by Bill Hillier and his colleagues in the 1970s at UCL. It is a mathematical model for street networks that calculating the topological spatial relationships. However, unlike other street network traditions, the primary focus of space syntax was the configuration of space between physical urban objects or street structure. And the space syntax in this study is used to investigate the post-colonial urban structure of the city and the distribution pattern of him within the system. And the outcome of this spatial analysis will serve as a foundation for further investigation of ethnographic fieldwork in order to detect the pattern of regularities from the everyday life of the local population in Ho Chi Minh City. So I'm going to present some initial findings about the morphological logic of hem distribution in the Ho Chi Minh City urban structure. First of all, I would like to introduce a little bit about the Excel model of Ho Chi Minh City, which was manually mapped in the QGIS software using Google Maps as the base map in order to include all types of hems. And at the global integration Excel analysis here, you can see that there are a significant number of short Excel lines, but highly integrated, thus distributed across the whole system. At the global scale, the highly integrated area become more dense and extensive. And when you look at the syntactic values table here, there is a significant gap between the mean and the maximum connectivity value, which I believe indicates a significant number of axial lines with the connectivity values ranging from 1 to 3. This observation led to my way of defining hem configurationally. In this definition, the short axial lines with the connectivity value of 1 are categorized as C1, while those with the connectivity values of 2 and 3 are categorized as C2+. And when compared to the legal definition of hem, this configuration is equal to C1 equal to shared pathway and dead end hem, while C2+ is equal to branch hem and main hem. Also, it is quite important to note that this legal definition of hem only came to play since the 2017, despite the existing of hem since before the 1975. And in order to investigate the distribution pattern of this short axial line, I overlaid the map of the C1 and C2+ on the connectivity map of the whole system here. And as you can see from here, many of these C1 and C2 are found to directly connected to the main thoroughfare network here. And significantly, the migration zone, which is the large inset here, are found with the highest concentration of C1 and C2+, while the colonial car, the smaller insect here, exhibit the lowest density of both types. And also both C1 and C2+ show a high maximum integration values when compared to the whole system. And as the radius increases, both of this type of shock SLIs become globally integrated. And in this integration angular segment analysis arranged from the local to the global scale, as the radius of 200 meters, you can see that there are lots of locally integrated cluster that's distributed across the whole system. As the radius increase, this cluster become more connected and form a network that cover entire city except for the colonial core. And at the global scale, this network actually reshape and shift from the northeastern part, which was the location of the Catholic parish, the migration zone before 1975, to the northwest of the new development area after the 1970s. And at the global scale, the entire colonial area is covered. As HCMC are generally found in only residential areas and absent from the main thoroughfare network, I decided to conduct a dual urban network analysis to examine this preconception in this model. And the dual urban network theory developed by Helia proposes that on city has a dual urban structure. The first one is the foreground network of global structure that formed by a few long and continuous lines driven by economic activities, while the second one is the background network of residential localities, which are consisted of a large number of shocked lines. And in this graph, these two graphs are composed of two different layers. The first layer is the monochrome layers, which represent the foreground network of global choice values, and the line thickness weighted by this value. Another layer, which is the red and blue layers, represent the background network of residential localities. This patch of the metric mean depth values, the patchwork map of background network pinpoint the localities of configurational similarities. And as you can see, at the walking distance of radius 800 meters, these localities are disconnected and distributed across the whole system. And again, as the radius expand, these localities started to form a network that travels across the whole city, the whole system, and especially showing the close relationship to the foreground network of global structure here. This analysis showing that HCMC is not just simply a collective of individual elements, but indeed an urban network. And this urban network is not just a residential dormitories, but have a potential to provide valuable insight into the post-colonial urban structure of the city, both spatially and socially. Given the spatial analysis outcome, the phase that I'm currently on, ethnographic fieldwork, aims to address the following questions. Firstly, what does the background network mean in the case of Ho Chi Minh City? Secondly, what are the characteristics of urban movement that was influenced by HEM network? And thirdly, to what extent does the spatial configuration of HEM explain the existence of regularities that define the everyday life of local population here? And this is the end of my presentation today. Thank you.